All set.
Welcome, everyone. We are so happy to have you here with us today. This is our fourth installment of our financial wellness series with the Aries Foundation. We have already done a presentation on Medicare. We've done a presentation on long-term care, and then we've also done one on retirement. So this is the fourth installment for financial wellness, all about budgeting and saving. We hope it'll bring you a lot of great information. It will be posted on Ask How after the presentation, if you want to refer to it again, or for those who didn't join us. And I will pass it over to Tom Alessi and Craig Richardson, who are presenting to us today from the Aries Foundation. Thank you so much, Tom and Craig.
So we appreciate that, Sarah, and thanks everybody for joining us. And so today's presentation is really about financial wellness and sort of this buzzword term that's, really, what does it mean? What does it mean to me? How do I define it? How do I go through this? And so what we're going to do is we're going to try to break this down into a couple of different parts to sort of help everybody sort of guide through this in terms of what it means in terms of overall financial well-being. A couple of things before we get started. Just know as Sarah just mentioned, we are recording this, so we are going to share the recording back. So if you do miss anything or not catch anything, you always can, Sarah will have it and she'll be able to send that out. Just know, because we have done, as Sarah said, several presentations, not only with the Perkins School, but we do them with the Carroll Center as well. So we have tried to remove as much of the visual content as we can. Realize that Craig and I still like to have some visual on the screen sometimes, but we've tried to remove as much as possible. The microphone should be muted. There is a chat box, so please, if you do have questions, feel free to drop them into the chat box as we're going along. And my co-host, who I will introduce in a second, is here to make sure that we stay on time and that any of those questions get answered, whether he can do that through the chat or he'll bring it out and we'll have a conversation and go through that. Real quick on the agenda, like I said, what is financial wellness? What does it mean to me? How do I define it? Ways of dealing with money. And then we'll talk about really breaking it down into money personalities, because we believe that money personalities drive some of our behavior. And you may either see or realize that there are certain of these personalities in each one of us. One tends to be a little bit more dominant than the other. And then ways that you can adjust your behavior as you're dealing with these personalities. And like I said, we're always available for Q&A. Sarah mentioned the Aries Foundation. We are also the Moody Street Group. We're Moody Street. We are a financial services firm in Newton. We dedicate a portion of the firm to dealing with our special needs resource network. Really, that's meant just to be a support for organizations and families dealing with an individual or a child who's differently abled or has a disability. My name is Tom Alessi. I am an investment advisor. I've been in financial services for 24 years now. As an investment advisor, that means I act as a fiduciary whenever I'm giving guidance or advice to any of my clients. I want to bring my co-presenter, Craig, if you can introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm Craig Richardson. I'm a financial services representative. I've been in the financial services industry for about 19 years now. And I specialize in working with families and individuals to help them define their financial goals and have a better relationship with their money.
And Craig will be chiming in as we go along. He's here to help me with the presentation. He's here to help me and like I said, man the chat box. So if you have questions, please take advantage of that. But he's also here to keep me on time so I don't go drifting off someplace in terms of this, and we keep it and be respectful of your time. Sarah mentioned one of the things that Craig and I have done over the last few years is we launched our own nonprofit. This nonprofit is dedicated entirely to the mission of delivering financial education, financial literacy. It is called the Aries Foundation for Financial Education. You can visit us on the web at ariesfoundation.org. The mission behind Aries is just that. It's trying to help everyone have a better relationship with their money, because whether you realize it or not, you are in a relationship with money. And just like every other relationship that you have, there are behaviors and triggers that cause us, we like to say, a little irrationally sometimes when we're dealing with our finances. The whole idea here, and what we're going to talk about mostly today, is ways to sort of adjust those behaviors way to sort of understand and recognize those triggers so that you can be better suited going forward in handling your money and your finances. All right, so financial wellness, like, everywhere we turn, right? There's somebody who's popping up who's saying, delivering, or I want financial wellness, or I'm trying to give financial wellness.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big buzzword right now, and exactly trying to understand what is financial wellness and what does that mean to each individual. So it's a different definition for almost everybody.
Right, and that's really I think the hardest part in dealing with it is because it's different for everyone's approach. I mean, what works for me may not work for Craig, and vice versa in terms of dealing with stuff. And so we're going to go through. The only way we figured we could do this was to really sort of hit on what we might call the fundamentals of financial well-being, sort of trying to get a handle on and understanding how I'm putting these pillars in place to make sure that I've got a guided path for being on the right track. Everybody, again, going to be a little bit different in terms of dealing with it. And then, like I said, the second half is going to be spent talking a little bit about those personalities that drive us and how we might be able to either understand or curb some of that behavior, depending on what it is. All right. So the first thing is, can I cover an emergency? Because I think this is probably one of the biggest drivers when we talk about financial stress, Craig, is this lack of money in the bank.
Yeah, I forget exactly what the number is, but it's a significant number. Over 50% of Americans have less than $400 tucked away for an emergency reserve. A lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck. And what they use for emergency reserves is debt instruments, whether that's home equity loan or credit cards or pulling money out of their 401k. And this can lead us into a lot of stressful behavior.
Yes, absolutely. And so, in our industry, right, it's usually it's like 3 to 6 months of basic expenses, Craig.
Yeah, so basic expenses being those necessary expenses, rent, food, shelter, clothing, those types of things. And we do recommend 3 to 6 months of those in place. But, as we've talked about in other webinars here, that a lot of people have come back from COVID and they've gone through a lot of those emergency reserves. So you're really in a rebuilding phase at this point. So at this point, what do we say? Like, even if you can have 4 to 6 weeks of emergency reserve, that's a good start.
Right, and even maybe starting smaller than that, right? So let's talk about emergencies that could happen, right? So that could be, the deductible on a car insurance, or the deductible on your home. Like, we all have car and home insurance. Basically, if you own a home, you have it. Maybe you have renter's insurance, but they all come with a deductible. And that deductible usually somewhere between $250 and $500, depending on the type of insurance that you have.
Yeah, could be 1,000 depending on what you choose for deductible.
Correct. So, for us, I think that's where the number should start. Like, so if we just use the 500, so we'll go somewhere in the halfway point there, Greg, in terms of it. But let's say it's 500. So now I need to figure out, all right, in order to get 500 into the bank over the next 3 months, how much do I have to put away to get there? What is that going to mean to my other spending and what I'm doing to make sure that I get there? And that's sort of the process of this with any type of, I'm trying to put this money away, but it's really, really important that the emergency reserve, that this fundamentally gets funded, basically, is that this gets set aside, because like Craig said, this is what causes major problems. This is what creates debt when we have this emergency come up and we're unable to just turn to somewhere, the bank account, whatever, and pay for it.
Yeah, because the problem becomes, and this is where a lot of the financial stress comes from, is when you do start creating debt. That's a lot of times when people start talking to me about getting financially fit, their biggest concern is that whatever debt they're dragging behind them. And if every time you have an emergency, now it costs you more because you're paying interest on that emergency, well, then it makes the problem you had even that much worse. So, and I think you were onto something very good, Tom, is the fact that, if it's $500 over 3 months, what does that break down, say, per week? and I think it's like about $40 a week. So if
Right.
you could put away $40 a week, in 3 months, you'd have that $500 saved up. Is that a doable? If it's not, maybe it's half of that. You do $20 a week, but at least get something started. And I think we also really advocate a lot, try to do it as set it up auto draft if you can. Anything that's automatically done, it comes out of your paycheck, goes directly into a savings account or some other vehicle for the emergency reserve, tends to happen a little bit easier than trying to remember every single week to put that money away.
Absolutely. And that is a big part of it, and trying to do that, what we would call set it and forget it type of thing. The next one is spending habits that support your values, right? So, this isn't so much, like Craig and I hate to use the word budget. It's just one of those, whenever we say to somebody, hey, can you show us your budget, or can we send you a budget sheet, or, anything you look at, Google it at some point, Google financial wellness or getting fit or whatever you want to call it in terms of financial well-being. One of the things that's going to pop up is going to say, create a budget or do a budget. And budgeting is so a turnoff for most people, because it feels like you're being constricted. Like, wait, I don't want to be told how I'm going to spend my money. I don't want to have to go through this. There's a lot that goes to that, Craig.
Yeah, and it also becomes a really stressful exercise, especially if you're living like paycheck to paycheck or on the edge, because you don't want to look at it. You don't want to have to create a budget and face what you're having to deal with. So, I think, Tom, you really put it a better way, is just look more, what are you spending your money on? Let's forget the budget. Let's go back to, what are your spending habits? How do you spend your money?
Right. And part of doing that is that analysis is just trying to understand, again, sort of the why.
Mhm.
And, where does that lead you in terms of, yes, I mean, I get it. Spending money makes us all feel good in most cases, unless we got to pay for stuff. Or like coming up here, we've got to pay Uncle Sam for something, those type of things. But for the most part, we're doing it because it brings joy to us. Okay, fine. But we want to understand part of that, because you want to make sure that you're staying it within the goals that you're trying to establish for yourself. Sometimes spending money just to spend money, that's where we get into trouble. And we'll talk about that with the spending, with the personalities, because that is definitely a personality that comes up with it. But it's just one of these, making sure that you're understanding where the money's going and why you're spending it, Craig, right?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing here too is, a lot of times we don't track what we call discretionary spending. And the reason we don't track it is because, well, I'm getting another check next week. So even if I'm short, I'm getting paid again in a week or 2 weeks if you buy weekly. So you always feel like you can make up that, that deficit that you have. The problem is when you get to a point where you don't, either because you're out of work for whatever reason, or you've retired, and now you're living on more of a fixed income. Now, how do you deal with those negatives, right? When you don't have enough, there's not another check coming in.
Right.
So, it's just, that's how you want to get a little bit of a handle on where you're spending your money now.
Absolutely. And then the other is, which leads sort of right into it, is confidence and control. I don't want to, a lot of people say like, what is that? Like, I'm not good with money, right, Craig? That's, and it usually just means that the individual, the person hasn't taken the time to really look at and go through it. It's much easier to just say, well, money's not my thing, or I don't like math or the numbers or that aspect of it. But, money management, money control is just like any other skill. And it's something that if you do it over time, you will learn the behavior, you will be able to control it, right, Craig? We always talk about that, about creating better spending habits.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just what you said, Tom, right off the bat, I'm not good with money. It's almost like the excuse why I don't have to control my money. I don't have to budget or control my spending because I'm just not good with it. So that's the excuse out. The other thing that happens with people, especially if you live paycheck to paycheck for a long time, is you get used to being behind the 8 ball, right? You're always trying to come from this position of I'm in debt, or I'm trying to get myself out, or something like that going on, and that becomes almost like your way of life. You're just used to it.
Right.
Trying to dig out of it is actually getting out of your comfort zone rather than into your comfort zone. But once again, if you want to have confidence and control over what's going on, you got to take these steps.
Right, and I think this is a big one when we talk about that overarching idea of financial wellness, like this idea that I'm confident about where I am, or I'm confident in the direction or the goals that I'm setting for myself. That's like a big part, one of the central pillars in terms of understanding where you are from a financial well-being standpoint. So, staying on track, this is one of those, again, don't like to use the budgeting term, but, something that's showing the progress, showing tracking, showing what you're doing, because you want to get to a goal, whatever the goal may be for you, whether that's a short-term goal, whether it's I want to take a nice vacation next year, whether I want to save for a down payment on a home or a new car, or, out into the future, education for a young child or retirement planning, whatever the goal is, there's got to be some way to be sort of following along, making sure that you're staying on track to it, because what happens for most people, Craig, is they start and then it falls off, just like the whole, we're in March, so probably if I asked, if we were sitting in a room, I asked how many people had a New Year's resolution and are still doing it, right? 3/4 of the rooms, the hands would have gone down.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those things, you try to do things, whether it's losing weight or budgeting your checkbook, and you're good for a couple of weeks because you're motivated. But then eventually you kind of slide back into the old habit, because that's what's comfortable. I think what more than just having that goal is you got to have a purpose. Why do you want to change this behavior? And what's going to be the end result if you do? So, like I said, the goal may be, okay, maybe I live in an apartment, I want to buy a house. Or maybe it's I want to be able to retire at 62 versus 67. Whatever that is, that's the purpose for why you're changing those spending habits, why you're now keeping track of discretionary spending where you weren't doing it before, because you got to have a purpose beyond the original motivation or you just won't stick with it.
Right. And it's just one of those things that's got to be there for keeping you on track. Some of this is tracking, as Craig had said, the dollars and the cents itself, but the other is trying to motivate yourself. That self-motivation is very, very difficult. It is not easy to do. It's not easy to stay there. And you need those smaller goals to build towards that end result, because otherwise you're going to go off path, like Craig had said. It's hard to keep that motivation up.
Yeah, and just like anything else, it always helps too if you have, a buddy, someone who's tracking this with you, whether it's, a spouse that you're both trying to get your financials together to get, in tandem, or maybe you just got a friend of yours who's also off track and you're just maybe trying to save for the same vacation type goal. Whatever it is, it's always good if you have somebody who can actually hold you accountable to your goal.
Yes, accountability is always a big thing whenever you're dealing with any goals. Doesn't matter financial, any goal. Accountability is a huge factor. The other, this becomes more of because this is one of the main like financial stress concerns. I mean, money is a big stress for most US population right now, right? And, debt is one of those causes. And so the idea with debt, and it's not so much like, hey, you're going to get out of debt tomorrow type of thing, but the idea is to identify debt, to understand, okay, my spending habits are causing me to get into debt. I need to make a change on this. And then I need to create some sort of a strategy and plan so that I am getting out of debt without having it all come back on me, Craig, right? The whole hamster wheel of debt thing.
Yeah, and this is something where you gotta kind of be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. Like I get a lot of people who say, well, I'll start putting an emergency reserve together as soon as I've paid off all my debt. The problem is you get halfway through paying off your debt and you have an emergency pops up and now you put yourself back in debt. So you're back in a hamster wheel. What you really have to do is kind of start building an emergency reserve that's not debt dependent. You're not taking out of a debt instrument so that when that emergency does come up, you're not now double dipping. Otherwise, you're never going to dig out. So you want to do these two things, hand in hand.
Right.
Pay yourself and pay the debt.
Yeah, and so sorry, I just meant to say that it's like it's just in that vision is sort of creating this, it's like a realistic, holistic spending plan. right? This whole idea of I'm gonna take care of what I need to, but I've also got to take care of this debt at the same time.
Well, absolutely. And it's because even with people who are good at paying their bills, they don't see themselves as a bill. They see themselves, if there's anything left over, then that can go into my savings.
Right.
And that's why they end up in this position. You got to see yourself as being important enough to put money away for you, so that when these things do pop up, you're in control of the situation. You're determining how it's funded or how it's being paid. You don't
Yes.
have to have permission from somebody. Because that's
I-
also
Yeah, sorry, Craig. Yeah, as in terms of dealing with that. So before we slide into the personality part of this and handling everything, just know, part of what we offer to everybody at Perkins is an opportunity to meet with us and have a conversation. On the screen for those, there is a link. Craig, do you have that link? Could you drop it into the chat box for me?
I don't think I have that. Maybe I do. Hang on.
That's the regular Calendly link.
Okay, I do have that. Yes.
Okay.
That box.
Okay.
That's
That's
no
our
problem.
scheduler link that if Craig's going to drop it in the chat box. You can copy and paste it, or if you click on it, it'll pop up our calendar. You can schedule a time whenever works for you. We're happy to answer questions on whatever's top of mind for you. Also on the screen, there is a QR code. So you can just shoot that QR code. It will also open up our calendar if that's easy for any of you. So you can shoot that and do that as well. We just found that sometimes that's a little bit easier, especially when there's a recording that we're sharing this to. Okay, so let's get into how you relate to money and the type of money personality. Now, for most of us, just understand that money personalities, we probably have a couple of them that are, over the years we have sort of developed, but we found that usually there is one of these that is more of the driver or more of the one that is in control than the others. And we're going to go through each one of them. We're going to go quick with this because I don't want to spend a lot of time dealing with it, but we will talk about, some of the drawbacks of that personality and then ways that you might be able to adjust or identify or try to deal with that. And just so that everybody knows, it's the different personalities. There's the pack rat, the money hippie, a spendthrift, a hustler, a gambler, a roller coaster rider, and a worrywart. So there's 7 money personalities that have been identified out there, and so when we look at the pack rat, basically the pack rat is somebody who saves endlessly, right? You just, everything is geared towards putting money away. Now, for Craig and I, that's not a bad thing. When we sit down and talk to somebody who's been saving and saving and saving, it's a good thing. But sometimes this takes on an irrational almost aspect, Craig, like the person feels like I can't spend this money.
Oh my God, Tom, I've seen this to do the extreme where people have done such a fantastic job saving, and now they're 5-10 years into retirement and they still won't spend it. And now they got more money than they could spend in retirement if they wanted to. So what was the whole point of saving all this and sacrificing if you never got to enjoy anything that you put away?
Right. And that's really what one of those drawbacks is. The drawback is that it's that fear of you almost end up missing out, right? You're not getting the enjoyment out of the savings, out of the money that you've put away, because that pack rat mentality is not letting you spend.
Yeah, it's fear driven. It's a fear action. Yep.
All right. So how do you balance that, right? So how do we sort of address the pack rat personality, right? It's trying to say, look, everything in moderation, right? So maybe it's like, look, let's set up, and we've always talked about different, now forgive us, we always use buckets as our visual, but think of it as different buckets, right? So let's set up accounts that one's for an emergency reserve, one is for savings for use, maybe one is for gifting purposes, one can be for uncertainties or unknowns, and something for retirement, something for legacy planning, but so that you have these different accounts, buckets, however you want to visualize it, that there's a bucket that can be spent. so that there's that liquidity, so that there's that opportunity, so I don't have to worry about it. I know I've got the money if the emergency happened. I know I've got the money for retirement, so I can spend this money now and make sure that you're spreading that out among it, because that will alleviate some of that pack rat mentality.
The other thing I think too, Tom, is that people don't look at retirement early enough, right? You always say, well, I'll deal with it when I get to it. But then
Right.
you're not spending anything because you're afraid, well, my paycheck's gonna stop and then there's nothing else coming in. If you look at it early enough, then you can set up, an efficient retirement plan. So you know what your paycheck's gonna be years before you retire. Which is
Exactly.
allows you to actually enjoy some of your money while you're younger and working, as opposed to having to push it all into retirement for some unknown event that you're not sure is gonna happen or not.
Right, right. So you get the balance there. You can enjoy it now and you enjoy it later.
Mhm.
So the next one is the money hippie, and all of these personalities all have their good sides, they all have their bad sides. The money hippie is, this is somebody who the whole I don't like money, or I'm not good with money type of thing. It's almost like anytime the conversation about money comes up, like the money hippie doesn't want to have anything to do with it. I'm not comfortable talking about it. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to have anything to do with it. Might have somebody in your household, like usually one spouse handles all of the bills, the other spouse has nothing to do with them, and it might be that personality that it's not so much, hey, I can't do it, it's just I don't want to do it. I don't want to have anything to do with it. So, really feels like money, not that money's evil, but that money might be evil type of thing. All
Yeah,
right.
if I have to, exactly.
Yeah. So the problem with the money hippie is that the money hippie isn't paying attention to it. So ultimately, as we get later in life, there's nothing there. And so a money hippie becomes very dependent on other people, especially later on in life, like because other people who will guide them, give them advice, handle the money, or maybe have to support them because they haven't thought about it themselves. So the balancing steps for a money hippie is to sort of take those baby steps like we talked about. This is getting on track, creating some sort of a spending analysis, just understanding where the money's going. We're not saying, hey, you got to get a full-fledged and forget, if you ever use the budget term with a money hippie, you'll send them screaming to the hills. They'll never talk to you. So it's more of just trying to get that understanding about where money is being spent and why it's being spent, and sort of try to bring them, Craig, right into the conversation.
Yeah, the issue here is when anything is negative, people don't want to deal with it. And if you dealing with money as a negative, they don't want to talk about it. The issue though is there's no escape from having to deal with money in some form or another, unless you have somebody who's going to deal with it all for you. So the best thing to do here is address it so you don't have to address it, right? Plan so you don't have to be thinking about it all the time, right? So I know, all right, we've set up for retirement, we've set up for our emergency reserve, we got all these things, because money hippies aren't necessarily poor. They just, money's coming in and they don't worry about it. Comes in, it goes out.
Right.
I'm not going to sit here and think about it that much. Well, if you take a little bit of time and think about it, then you don't have to think about it later.
Absolutely. Right. And that's what it's all about. Like any of this, it's going back to the fundamental pillars of financial well-being. It's one of the ideas of I've got some control. The next one is sort of the opposite, right? It's not so much that it just a spendthrift is somebody who just enjoys spending money, the endorphin rush, the gratification, impulse buying, whatever you want to call it. This is all stuff that comes with a spendthrift mentality. And there's not too much of that buyer's remorse thing, Craig, because they just know, okay, well, I'm going to get some more in, I'm going to spend it. They enjoy doing. You might know somebody in your life who's like this, who always wants to pick up the check, or always, hey, it's on me, don't worry about it type of thing. They generally have a spendthrift mentality.
Yeah, and they may have this, I'm living for now mentality. I don't know if later is going to come, right?
Yes.
It's the opposite of the pat rack. I mean, the
right.
Pack rat. Yeah, it's the opposite. Maybe they had experience with their family who passed away early and never got to enjoy any of their money, or they had some kind of experience that made them say, I'm living for now. So once again, though, it's another situation that's out of balance, right? And you're going to bring those up next.
Yeah, and so,
Excellent.
the problem with the spendthrift is where it can lead is debt. Because this can catch up with you. And sometimes, as Craig was saying, that the idea is, well, the money's just going to keep coming in so I can keep spending it, that sometimes that catches up, especially when we run into a situation like we did over the last 2 years with COVID, a pandemic, nothing anybody ever thought was going to stop the world, basically, but, pay could have stopped for that time period. For a spendthrift, that can be, overwhelming disaster. Because they're really counting on the fact that there's more money coming and they're always looking to spend, right? So for this one, the balancing step is unfortunately that hardcore, you've got to go budget here. This is somebody who's really got to be, look, I'm going to stay within a parameter or a balanced number that I can deal with. What we try to say a lot of times with somebody with this sort of personality is to do that the delay thing, Craig, right? The cooling off period. We want to buy something, let's wait a day. Do you have the same luster for it that you did yesterday? Do you need to do that, right? Do you absolutely have to have it, or is this just a want?
Yeah, and this also depends on the level of the spendthrift you're dealing with, because I think a lot of times this can also get into addictive behavior.
Yes.
This is gambling or anything else, because you're getting that endorphin rush from buying something, the instant gratification of having something new that's kind of giving you that lift. And sometimes when you pull back from being a spendthrift, especially like you were talking about going through COVID and maybe your limited income, that can be a depression that comes in when you're trying to stop that as well. So this is a great one to, if you have access to mental health, or you have access to a buddy who can help you through this system to help you stay accountable, keep you positive, look at other things that kind of gear your emotional state towards other things that could lift you up, whether it's exercise or going to, doing stuff with a friend, to replace the spending that's making you feel better.
Right.
So
find another outlet.
Right. This is not just to stop spending money, because it's not necessarily going to happen. You got to plan this a little bit more.
So the next one's the hustler, right? This is, somebody who's always looking, I got to get the next thing. I'm looking for the next job, for the next income, it's all about creating wealth, right? There's nothing wrong with the hustler, except for when it goes to the extreme, like everything else gets pushed to the side and it's all about making money or getting the recognition for making money. And that's where the whole centric of their being comes from. It's all about that I'm making money type of thing.
Yep.
So this tends to be the biggest drawback here, is it tends to really drive a workaholic. This is somebody who tends to put the rest of their world, and that may be family and friends and other things, off to the side, because it's all about focused on making money. It's all focused on whether it's their career or their job or whatever side hustle or side gig they got going on, that they're just trying to get more of. And so everything else in their world tends to fall to the side. So go ahead.
I would say that's another one that could be for lots of different reasons. Either you don't want to deal with other issues in your life, and so you bury yourself in work, because who's going to say, hey, I got to work, right? The easiest excuse in the world. The other thing too, like you said, if their self-worth is coming out of how much they make, there's never enough. They never make they can make a 100,000, $1 million. It doesn't matter. It's this whole thing that just keeps driving. So it's another thing that's just way out of balance. The thing is how to get those balance steps, Tom, right?
Right. And so that balance is trying to apply moderation to everything, right? That's the whole concept here, and trying to figure it out. A lot of times we'll talk about setting boundaries, like that, work can only be to a certain period of time, or maybe if you've been working 7 days a week, maybe it's like you're only going to work 6 days a week, and you're going to dedicate some time for family, for friends, for those other things, loved ones in your world, so that you're getting an opportunity to experience life other than just the hustle. because the hustle, while it feels good, and it's sort of like the spendthrift with that whole endorphin rush on it, that it can take away and lead to serious consequences. Workaholics tend not to live a long and wonderful life because they burn out.
Yeah, like what is that saying they say? No one ever wrote, I should have stayed longer at work on their tombstone.
Yes, I should have continued there.
Should have spent more time at work, right?
Right. So the gambler, and a gambler, we're not talking about somebody who's got a gambling problem or a gambling addiction. That's a completely separate conversation. This is sort of the combination between the spendthrift and the hustler, basically. This is somebody who's willing to take risks and willing to take risks with their assets, whether those assets are in their retirement account, whether those assets are with their, equity in their home, those type of things, that they tend to sort of connect to that. And I think, Craig, during COVID, you saw this a lot with these online tools, the Robinhood effect, these trading tools. This is where you start to see that almost gamification of investing. Like I'm getting involved with it, and I'm not really, there's no real sense of what I'm investing for.
Yeah, the problem with the Robinhood effect is actually had the opposite effect, where a lot of people who didn't have a lot of money ended up giving it to people who did. So like I said, it was just the opposite. And, I think it comes to this whole, get rich quick type mentality that a lot of people feel like the winning scratch ticket, or
Yes.
I've got the stock that, like in Forrest Gump, all of a sudden he's a multimillionaire because he bought Apple.
Right.
They're just looking for that one scheme to put them over the top so they can be wealthy. And it's okay if you gamble some, if you get a little bit of the money that you can afford to lose, it's going to affect your overall financial wellness. But it's when you put everything on the line, that you put everything at risk, that's when it starts to become a larger issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where it is that, especially when it starts dipping into, like Craig just mentioned, retirement accounts, home equity positions, education funding for the kids. Like, these aren't positions that we should be taking high risk with. And that's what happens, and in some cases, this was the whole Bitcoin thing going on as well, that, some of these assets now are gone, that because of this risk, because of this rush, right? So, some of this needs to be addressed as, I understand, I'm willing to take the risk here, but there needs to be this other side of the portfolio that's more conservative or set up to say, there's savings over here. I've got mad money I can use over there.
Right. Once again, it's about having a balance of what you're doing. So you can still have an opportunity to take a big win, but you're not putting everything at risk doing it.
Right.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
The roller coaster rider really is sort of that combination between the pack rat and this is the buyer's remorse thing, right? So I'm like, I want to buy, I bought, and it's like, oh, why did I buy that? I didn't really need that. Should I do it? Should I not do it? So it's this whole up and down cycling of things. And, this really causes more stress on the individual, because it's sort of this, I'm up with the buy and then I'm down, as Craig said, then there's depression afterwards. And go ahead.
Or motion sickness. Every time I see a roller coaster now, I get motion sickness.
Yes. So it's just this whole nature of looking to be more in balance with everything, right? So the idea here is to understand why we're purchasing, what I'm able to afford, why I want to do it, how am I going to make those payments if I bought something that, and I didn't pay for it all up front, how am I going to pay it back? So it sort of puts a realistic guideline on everything. That's how you deal with this roller coaster behavior. And the last one in there is the worry wart, right? And the worry wart just feels like they never have enough. Doesn't matter what they're trying to get, doesn't matter what they've put away. They're always with this mentality of like, gee, I'm worrying about money. Money's an issue. We don't have enough, or I need to do this, I need to do that. So this is a self-induced stressor, basically.
Yeah, and it's another one of those too. It's also, you get used to worrying. It's another control factor. It's a comfort zone. It's almost like, if I have nothing to worry about, I worry that I have nothing to worry about. Right.
Yeah.
And, once again, it's another bit of, trying to work out why you feel that way all the time, or why that is a situation you put yourself in.
Absolutely, it's this like feeling that I'm never gonna get there, right? So, there's the drawback on it. It's this constant like weight that's there that's never gonna get lifted. Doesn't matter how much anybody says or tries to say you're okay, things are good. There's this constant nagging in the back of the brain that says, no, I'm not. I've got to have some problem. In this case, this is where Craig kept talking about having a what do you want to call it, a budget buddy, or a money friend, or somebody where a coach or an advisor is somebody that you can just talk to about this, and who can walk you through, showing that, well, actually you're not that bad a position, and here's some steps and here's some strategies that you can take to show you that you're actually in a good place, and let's create a money management system or some sort of a balanced plan, Craig, in terms of dealing with that.
Yeah, I think one of the issues here too, especially with what we just went through, Tom, with the downturn in the market, is you see a lot of these become, not that all of them can't be, but emotional investors. They will all of a sudden see the market start to drop and start pulling back into cash positions because they're worried everything that, the whole sky's going to fall.
Right.
That can be another drawback of being a worrywart, is that you pull out too soon and you'll get back in too late, because you are concerned about the market. So what you said is perfect. Having somebody you kind of talk you off the cliff, and kind of hold your hand and you go through the tough cycles, and that's important when you're an emotional investor.
Yeah, absolutely. So does any of this feel like you, right? So that I'm stressed, not sure about my debt, how much I need to pay. I don't have a money management system. I don't know how to get through paying off my debt. I don't have a plan in place for that. Budgeting, cash flow system, I've got limiting beliefs. I don't think I can do this, right? How am I going to deal with this? And I'm trying to figure out, how do I make my money work for me? All of these are sort of the financial wellness. This is where it all gets, as Craig said from the beginning, all individualized. This is like some of the things, everybody's got a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and trying to make sure, how am I sort of navigating through this where it applies to me and I'm able to take control of it. And as we talked about, some of those steps from the beginning are the guidelines to get you there, to sort of put you on the path and to say, these are the pillars, these are the things you need to be putting in place, because once those get put in place, everything else sort of gets propped up. And you start to feel like, wait a minute, I'm in a little bit more control here. I've got a little bit more of an understanding. I can now be setting those goals and achieving them as I want to.
Mhm.
And so, as we said, one of the things that we do for everybody is make an offer. You're part of the Perkins School. We're happy to have a conversation. If there's something that's eating away at you, or in the back of your brain, or something, a conversation or a question that you have, feel free to reach out to us. Craig put the link in the chat box, so you can, copy and paste that. You can shoot the QR code on the screen. It'll just open up our calendar. We're happy to have a conversation. Whatever that topic is for you, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help you sort of get a handle on and understand where you're at in all of this.
You're at 45 minutes, Tom, just so you know.
So I'm almost done. Thank you. See, that's why he's here. Can you do me a favor, Craig? One of the things we ask of everybody is that we do a lot of these, and we do them in a lot of different locations. And we just ask that if you take a second, there's a link in the chat box. It's a quick evaluation form, feedback. Just give us a little bit of info. We certainly appreciate that for the time that you spent with us today. I will tell you, in that survey, there's a checkbox that says yes or no. Just understand that if you check no, you're never going to hear from us. It'll just ask you, hey, do you want to set up a time to meet? Because we'll reach out to you versus you going through and setting up the time. But the easiest thing to do is to use the scheduler. And that brings me to the end, which is, anybody have any questions for us? Any questions in the chat box, Craig?
I don't have any questions in the chat box now, but I'm happy to entertain them.
Sarah, anything you want to say before we close out here?
Thank you all for joining us today with some great information about handling our finances at home. This will be posted on Ask How if you need to refer to it again. But other than that, thank you so much, Tom and Craig, for this great presentation, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Certainly appreciate that, Sarah. Have a great evening. Oh, there it is.